Chapter 121 Spiders and Bats, Part 2. In Peter's room at the Parkers' house, Peter clung tightly to the doorframe, shouting, "Let me go! This is my body. I can do whatever I want with it. I'm going out to meet Gwen." Then he glanced at his watch and said, "Please, it's already 10 o'clock. We need to meet by the river at 10:30. We can still make it if we hurry. I can't break our promise. She just went through such a dangerous situation yesterday. She definitely needs someone to comfort her. But you haven't even finished writing a decent battle plan. You've been dawdling here for 3 hours. You've only written a third of it. You have to finish it before you can go play. Are you crazy? Even school teachers don't ask anyone to do homework for 3 hours straight. I'm leaving now. Let me go." Peter's arms relaxed and tightened intermittently, as if he were playing tug-of-war with himself. Finally, Venom roared, "You're 16. You'll be 18 in 2 years. The 18-year-olds I've seen are far more hardworking and disciplined than you. You're lying. All my upperclassmen are just like me. We're the normal ones. What high school student in this world would stay cooped up in their room doing homework? Get me out of the house. I'm really going to be late." 20 minutes later, Peter landed on a rooftop, mentally warning Venom, "I'm going on a date with Gwen later. Don't you dare peek." "You haven't even held her hand?" Venom said. "How could that be? Of course we held hands. We only held hands, right?" Peter blushed slightly and said, "So what? We've only been dating for a few months, and we haven't even gone on more than 100 dates." A while later, at a coffee shop by the river, Gwen had already ordered 2 coffees. She was very happy to see Peter, and Peter excitedly ran over to her, saying, "Sorry, I'm a little late today. There was a bit of traffic on the way." "It's all right, I just arrived too early. I've already ordered coffee. Let's go sit over there." Peter had just taken the coffee cup when he suddenly felt his body spiral out of control. He opened his arms and hugged Gwen tightly. Gwen was startled, and Peter grimaced as he released her, saying, "Oh, sorry. I just..." Then he saw tears suddenly welling up in Gwen's eyes. Gwen said, "You saw the newspaper? You saw what happened on the street next to the school yesterday?" Peter was there at the time, so of course he knew, and then he said, "Ah, yes, I saw you there too." Before Peter could say anything more, Gwen, her eyes red with tears, said, "You have no idea how dangerous yesterday was. I watched a young policeman die with my own eyes. My God, I just can't accept it." "Hold her. You've gone too far. How can you control me? Listen to me. Hug her." Peter felt his body was out of control again. He hugged Gwen tightly, and Gwen hugged him back and started crying. Soon she was trembling all over from crying, and Peter could only pat her back. Took Gwen a while to calm down. She wiped her tears with a tissue and said, "I'm so sorry. I couldn't control myself, but..." She choked up again, saying, "My dad is already under a lot of pressure. I don't even dare to show my fear, for fear that he'll worry about me. If he gets distracted at work, he might be the one who suffers." Seeing Gwen's sad and worried expression, Peter felt a pang of sadness. He could barely speak, but then his arm involuntarily rose up and grasped Gwen's hand holding the coffee cup. Venom whispered in Peter's mind, "Aren't you going to say something?" "What should I say?" This is too abrupt. You are the most cowardly human I have ever met." Finally, Peter mustered his courage, looked into Gwen's eyes, and said, "Don't worry, I've always been with you." After saying that, he quickly withdrew his hand as if he had been burned, then picked up his coffee cup and took a sip. Gwen looked at his slightly flushed face and suddenly burst into laughter through her tears. She said, "You're really different today." Peter thought to himself, "It's all your fault. Gwen will definitely think I'm being unreasonable." Then he heard Gwen say, "But I think it's actually pretty good. You were a bit too introverted before. I really didn't expect you to be so proactive." Peter's face turned even redder, and he stammered, "And nothing. It's nothing. It's only right. You're hopeless." Venom's voice echoed in his mind again. Gwen giggled, almost choking on her coffee. She seemed to really enjoy seeing Peter's shy and embarrassed state. "Let's go see a movie later to our usual theater. I have a coupon for a large cheeseball bucket which we can use." After the two left the coffee shop, Peter said to Gwen, "Sorry, wait a minute. I'm going to the convenience store." He ran into the nearest convenience store, went to the shelf, grabbed a bag of chocolate balls, and paid. Gwen saw him come out of the store, and then she looked at the bag of chocolate balls in Peter's hand and said, Why did you suddenly buy this? I don't remember you liking chocolate. Peter tore open the packaging, took one out, handed it to Gwen, shrugged, and said, I just think eating sweets makes me feel better. Gwen was delighted. She put her hand on Peter's shoulder and said, It seems you've really changed a lot. My friends used to say you had no idea how to please girls. But now it seems you're not so bad after all. Peter blushed a little, then he took out one, unwrapped it, and put it in his mouth. Oh shit, this tastes awful. Venom's voice rang out. Then why did you make me buy it? Peter chewed it and said, I think it's pretty good. Isn't this what all chocolate tastes like? You naive kid. This chocolate is worse than I expected. You never know how cheap things can be good, Venom said. When they arrived at the movie theater, Peter received a tub of cheese balls that was almost half his height from the salesperson. Gwen said apologetically, I didn't expect it to be this big when I bought it. It didn't look like it had this many in the picture. Peter struggled a bit to carry the large bucket and said, It's okay. You know I've been eating a lot more lately. I think we should be able to finish it. When the movie started, the two chose a seat in the middle of the back row. Peter wedged the large bucket of cheese balls between the armrest and the back of the seat in front of him, right between the two of them within easy reach. After the movie started, the two ate cheese balls and drank cola while quietly discussing the plot. Gwen had just reached for the cheese balls when she saw a black tentacle swiftly snatch 7 or 8 cheese balls from the bucket. She rubbed her eyes and exclaimed, What was that? What? Peter turned to look at her. When Gwen looked back, the tentacles had disappeared. Because there were so many cheese balls, it was impossible to tell that a few were missing. Gwen blinked and said, It's nothing. I might be hallucinating. Then Peter heard Venom complaining in his head, This doesn't taste good either. It tastes like cheap junk food. Why are you making such a fuss? Peter said, Isn't this delicious? As he spoke, he grabbed 5 or 6 cheese balls and threw them into his mouth. When the movie ended, Gwen looked at the empty bucket, opened her mouth and said, I know you've become a big eater before, but this shouldn't be so exaggerated, right? This is a serving of cheese balls for 10 people. In Peter's mind, Venom burped and said, It's not very tasty, but it's quite filling. After dropping Gwen off at home, Venom saw Peter still wandering around outside and said, Can't you go back and finish that damn battle plan? God, have mercy on me. I don't need any battle plan. Peter squatted on a rooftop, took out the Spider-Man suit from his backpack, put it on and said, We'll just wear this and take down that stronghold. It's that simple. You're going to get a really bad beating, Venom said. Half an hour later, Peter was running for his life in an alley when a cloud of black mist enveloped him, slowing his movements. Then, a pair of sharp claws slashed at his back, but a clump of black slime blocked the attack. Peter turned around and threw a punch, and the opponent instantly teleported away. Before he could turn around, another vampire teleported in front of him and swung a claw at him. Peter ducked to dodge, but another bat pounced down. Damn it! I've fallen for their trap. They've been waiting for me here all along. Peter looked around and saw that he was surrounded by at least 4 or 5 high-ranking vampires. This kind of opponent is a perfect counter to Peter. Although Peter is strong and has spider sense, he doesn't have any good ways to counter magic. Although his fists are powerful, they are useless if he can't hit anyone. Although he is fast, he doesn't have wings. Once the opponent turns into a bat and flies up, he won't be able to catch up for a while. On the contrary, the vampires could take turns harassing him, with one taking the lead while the others interfered from the side, severely slowing Peter down. Listen, if you can't resolve this problem in 10 minutes, I'm going to have to step in, Venom said. Fight back? You can't even fight? Then why not now? Can't you? Peter rolled on the ground again, dodging another attack, and shouted, Come help me now? This is the consequence of not making a battle plan. And do you think I didn't want to? Do you know how much trouble I would cause? As they were talking, the high-ranking vampires seemed to have given up on harassing him. They cornered Peter and launched an all-out attack on him. Soon, Peter's suit was scratched in several places, and it would probably be torn after a few more hits. Venom said, All right, now, clear your mind. I'm going to make my move. Just then, a gunshot rang out, and one of the high-ranking vampires let out a scream, with wisps of black smoke rising from its body. A black man wearing a leather jacket and an eye patch climbed over the wall of the alley. He slashed another vampire on the shoulder with his blade, black smoke rising from the point where the blade touched his flesh. The vampire tried to transform into a bat to escape, but another slash severed his wings. He fell to the ground, fluttered twice, and was then impaled in the heart by a silver wedge. The man who made the move was called Blade, a half-vampire and a vampire hunter. He had been tracking this group of high-ranking vampires for months, and now that they had gathered together, he could wipe them all out in one fell swoop. Blade's prediction was correct. In just a few exchanges, he had killed one vampire and wounded another. However, he was so focused on fighting the vampires that he didn't notice the persons surrounded by them. When he came to his senses, he saw black slime erupt from the crowd, and a figure soared into the air. Amidst a massive amount of black slime, a gigantic monster with wings on its back emerged into the air, a bat symbol protruding from its chest. Dao Feng looked up and saw a huge black bat with a wingspan of over 10 meters, almost blotting out the sky, appearing over New York. Chapter 122 The Arbat Incident Part 1 Blade looked up at the terrifying monster in midair, slowly took 2 steps back, swallowed hard, and then pulled out his phone to say into the other end of the line, "They're planning to declare war on humanity." Inside S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury strode down the corridor, agents following behind. With each rapid footstep, office lights flickered on. Holding the phone, Nick spoke quickly, "Jack, get the Queen's deployment map right now. Fiona, contact the vampire hunters in New York and ask them what's going on." Nick turned a corner, and the agents assigned to the mission left the group and headed towards their offices, while the rest followed behind Nick. Nick then asked, "Who's in charge of liaising with the Daywalkers?" "Coulson, boss. It's always been Coulson. Transfer this part of the work to Sharon, and have Coulson immediately liaise with Stark. If the vampires really declare war on humanity, we must organize the strongest resistance force as quickly as possible." Natasha emerged from one of the offices and walked quickly alongside Nick. The female agent said, "The intelligence provided by the Daywalker has been confirmed to be accurate. The monster is currently over Queens. The Daywalker has shown a strong willingness to cooperate. Should we invite him here? Let him go to the underground of Zone 2. For so many years, he has been unwilling to cooperate with us. Now that he has changed his attitude, this must be a big deal." "I'll make the arrangements right now," Natasha said. "There's another issue. The captain has already gone to the battlefield and made initial preparations against the monster, but the follow-up combat plan still needs to be arranged. Get the combat team ready to move out immediately. No matter what the vampire is doing, we have to deal with that monster first." Natasha took out her phone and said into the other end, "Clint, how are you and Daisy's preparations going? The helicopter will depart in 20 minutes. Report back immediately once it reaches its destination." Nick assigned tasks as he walked, until he arrived at his office, where Coulson was already waiting. Coulson said, "I have contacted all available combat forces." Before he could continue, Hill walked in and said, "The vampires are indeed making unusual moves, Chief. I've reviewed their activity range over the past 6 months, and the entire East Coast vampire community is intentionally heading towards New York." As Nick's most capable assistant, Hill spoke frankly. She strode to the screen, turned on the projector, and introduced, "About a week ago, a shootout broke out between vampires and police at the border of Queens and Brooklyn. The vampire group involved had only arrived in New York a month ago. In addition, none of the 15 recorded vampire attacks this month were perpetrated by local New York vampires." "Who is in charge of monitoring the movements of this group?" Coulson asked. "Now is not the time to assign blame," Nick said. "SHIELD's laissez-faire attitude toward vampires is not without reason. If possible, I would like to drag them all out into the sunlight, but we all know that's impossible." "But this time it's different," Coulson said. "Our premise for letting the vampires run rampant is that they remain scattered and only launch individual attacks at most. But if they really decide to declare war on humanity on all fronts, then we will definitely retaliate fiercely." Just then, Nick's phone rang. He picked it up and said, "The Daywalker has arrived? Okay, don't make any rash moves. Calm him down first. I'll be right there." Then he said to Coulson, "You keep an eye on Stark. Never mind, Hill, you go. Go to Stark Tower and make contact with Pepper first. Phil, you go to the psychiatric clinic in Hell's Kitchen. Schiller is unlikely to be willing to take action. He has always claimed that he has no special abilities. I don't want him to go out and fight vampires directly, Coulson. Haven't you realized that we recruited him not for his special abilities, but for his brains? You don't need to do anything. Just stay there and wait for my instructions. If the situation changes, I will tell you how to negotiate with him." After Coulson left, Nick quickly activated the elevator and headed to Area 2 to meet Blade. After he left, the lights inside S.H.I.E.L.D. quickly came on, and countless agents who had received orders began to operate. This massive intelligence agency was running at full capacity in just a few tens of minutes. Despite the threat of foreign invasion, S.H.I.E.L.D., with its unconventional talent management system, remains united. After all, regardless of which faction they belong to, they must resist should the vampires truly go to war with humanity. In a dimly lit underground meeting room, Blade Master Eric heard footsteps approaching. When Nick opened the door, Eric stepped forward and shook his hand. Nick said, "Time is of the essence, so let's get straight to the point. First of all, we're not here to interrogate you, but," Eric said, "stop talking nonsense. I'll tell you everything I know right now. Listen, that giant bat monster is no ordinary creature. You should know that vampires can transform into bats, and this ability is not without reason. I won't go into the occult knowledge related to the origins of vampires, but there are also disputes within the vampire community. There has always been debate within this race about their origin story. Just as you humans say, some people believe that vampires originated in the Bible and are God's creation. But there is another group of people, whom I call bat believers, who firmly believe that deep in the universe there is a bat totem, and it is this bat totem that gave vampires the power to transform into bats and drink blood. The Theosophists and the bat believers have been locked in a bitter feud. Of course, the Theosophists have always been closer to humans, and most of those who have contact with you human leaders are moderate Theosophists. They believe that humans and vampires are both creations of God, and that we should be brothers and sisters. They have always been the restrained faction among vampires with many different rules. They do not advocate killing, are willing to accept frozen blood, and prefer to live in seclusion among humans and participate in human society. We have records of all these people, Nick said. Some moderate vampires even come to us to register. Many of these vampires work in hospitals or blood banks. This is why humans are reluctant to carry out a large-scale extermination of vampires. Some of them are too closely connected to human society, and if not handled properly, it could lead to color panic. That's right, but there are moderates and radicals. There has always been an extremely radical faction within the vampire community, which is what I'm talking about, the faction that worships the bat totem. They believe that believers in bat totem should be superior to ordinary humans by nature, and that as part of the bat god, they should be born to rule over mankind. I've heard about it. Nick walked to the table and sat down. He poured himself a glass of water and said, "I know that vampires have been trying to infiltrate human society. Can you tell me more about the bat totem? I'm guessing that this bat monster must be related to that totem, right?" Blade Warrior Eric crossed his arms and said, "You should know my background. I'm not exactly a full-fledged vampire. All the information I have comes from my vampire hunter teacher. But I also have a few good friends who are gentle vampires, and they bring me the latest news from within their clan. One of my friends, who works for the famous Count Dracula, recently informed me that the radical faction, led by my enemy Deacon, is about to make a move. They seem to have received a prophecy through some kind of ritual that the power of the Bat God will descend upon the New York area, and whoever obtains this power will become the new vampire leader. You know, everyone initially thought this was a fabricated story they made up to fight for power. This kind of thing happens all the time. Of course. Concocting a seemingly plausible prophecy and then organizing some minor actions is enough to put pressure on the opponent. But now it seems things aren't so simple. Eric also went over and sat down. He and Nick sat at opposite ends of the table, with only a light bulb flickering above them. He said, "In fact, this prophecy is not entirely a lie. According to my investigation, they do have a ritual that can summon a shadow that looks like a bat. This shadow can greatly enhance vampires, but the price is that it will turn them into berserk bat monsters. It was through this ritual that they heard a voice telling them to go to New York. I am trying to find out the specifics of the prophecy, but I haven't found anything yet. However, I do know that the terrifying bat monster in the sky right now is probably the power of the so-called bat god descending. Okay, I've figured out the backstory. Now the question is, how do we deal with him?" Nick took out a projector and showed it to Eric. On the projector, Steve was chasing a bat monster. Nick said, "It's daytime now. This bat isn't afraid of the sun, and it seems incredibly strong with some special abilities. More importantly, it seems to know a lot of tactics and should have intelligence no less than that of humans. I suggest you don't use the methods for dealing with ordinary vampires to deal with him. If he is truly the creation of the Bat God, then he certainly doesn't have the weaknesses of vampires. You'd better treat him as a large-scale monster. And more importantly, Eric said with a frown, this is a signal that they want to wage a full-scale war against humanity. They want to welcome the arrival of the Bat Totem and then rule the world. Perhaps you can deal with this monster, but you must be prepared for the upcoming large-scale vampire attack. After saying that, he stood up and said, I will now contact all the vampire hunters I know, as well as the moderate vampires who are unwilling to participate in the invasion. We will try our best to form a front. At least for now. We stand with you and let those crazed bat monsters go to hell. Nick stood up as well, and the two shook hands. Nick said, the destruction of human society is not good for anyone. You can use this to persuade them. If they still want to have a prosperous society to live in, then it's best not to let those beasts invade. Eric nodded, his two black hands clasped together, signaling the official start of the Bat invasion. Chapter 123, The Arbat Incident, Part 2. Inside Stark Tower, Stark was fiddling with a strange machine shaped like a flower bud. Schiller, Coulson, and Hill stood by watching. Finally, Stark pressed a button and said, remember, this ultraviolet generator has a maximum kill range of only 20 meters. You'd better lure all the vampires together before turning it on. Just as he finished speaking, Jarvis sent a message. A large number of vampires have appeared on the 3rd Street in Queens. Coulson said with a headache, sure enough, as soon as it gets dark, they're going to launch a full-scale attack. How is that bat monster? Schiller asked. Coulson was even more troubled. He said, it's unbelievable. That monster has vanished. Stark straightened up and poked his head out from behind the machine, asking, disappeared? Such a huge monster. Didn't you have anyone watching it? The captain fought with it for a long time. According to the intelligence the captain sent back, the monster was not very aggressive and seemed to be just a signal. He didn't see what happened, and the bat monster disappeared. Don't let your guard down, Schiller said. Their so-called Bat God power descending. This monster may just be an appetizer. After all, if you're going to launch an invasion, you wouldn't put the most powerful weapons on the vanguard. That's right, Hill said seriously. Director Nick also thought it was just a sign of an attack, and he did indeed play the role of an attack horn. Now that it's getting dark, a large number of vampires lurking in New York have begun to move. When it's completely dark, we will have a fierce battle to fight. Coulson glanced at his watch and said to Stark, how many of these ultraviolet generators can be produced in 3 hours? A maximum of 20, Jarvis replied. Stark Industries' production lines are operating at full capacity with less than 10% redundancy, but due to speed limitations, they can only produce a maximum of 20 units before nightfall. Not nearly enough, Coulson said. Doesn't S.H.I.E.L.D. have any weapons in reserve to deal with vampires? Of course we have them, Hill said, stepping forward and supporting the machine. But those are just individual soldier equipment like UV flashlights and silver-plated bullets. You don't even know where all these vampires in New York came from. So, you mean your area of effect firepower is insufficient? Schiller asked. That's the biggest problem. Coulson sat down in his chair, put one hand on the table, and covered his forehead. A well-trained agent, if fully armed and equipped with all the weapons that counter vampires, can ignore the differences in physical strength and magic and take down 1 to 3 vampires. But the problem is that the number of agents is far too small compared to the number of vampires. The police can only deal with 1 at most, let alone ordinary people. 10 of them can't beat 1 vampire. Once the vampires organize a group to attack, the difference in numbers will be more than 10 times. They have 2 different forms, humanoid and bat-like, which can do different things and have different focuses. Once they start an organized strategic offensive, the human defense line can hardly last an hour. What about heavy firepower? Hill covered his forehead and said, actually, that's the biggest problem. There are quite a few moderates among the vampires who are on good terms with high-ranking members of Congress. The moderates say they have no idea what happened. They declare that the moderate vampires did not participate in this invasion at all, and strongly protest against the indiscriminate use of heavy firepower by humans against vampires. Actually, I can understand the decisions of some members of Parliament, because if humanity really uses heavy firepower like missiles and pushes the moderate vampires to the edge, then these vampires will also participate in the invasion, and then a real war between the 2 races will break out. Many moderate vampires live in human society and play important roles. Some even fall in love and marry humans. If a war breaks out between the two races, social stability will suffer tremendous turmoil, which is a result that no one wants to see. Stark said angrily, "So we're just going to take this beating without fighting back? Why can't they resolve their internal problems themselves? We just want one answer. Are we going to fight or not?" I guess those moderates are telling you they're actively negotiating to ease the conflict, but I can tell you definitively that most of them are waiting for that so-called Bat God to descend. Once the vampires gain the upper hand, they'll immediately switch sides and claim to be followers of the Bat God, born to rule humanity. Ambition always swells with ability. The so-called moderates are nothing more than waiting for one side to gain absolute dominance. They are a bunch of opportunists. Once humanity gains the upper hand and the Bat God makes no further move, they will immediately claim to be messengers of friendship between the two races. But once the Bat God really descends and brings about the end of humanity, they will immediately grovel at the feet of the Bat God and say that they are devout believers, Schiller said. Coulson sighed, spread his hands and said, "Everyone understands this, and this is our current predicament. But you've forgotten you still have a card to play. Don't tell me Nick hasn't figured out where that missing internet line in New York went." Coulson opened his mouth, then hesitated before saying, "You mean shifting the blame eastward? But isn't that a bit too risky? After all, we know almost nothing about that faction. That's a decision you'll have to make yourselves." Schiller finished speaking and turned to Stark, saying, "Stop thinking about your mass production device. Can't you think about it another way?" Stark said, "What brilliant idea do you have now? Tell me about it. I really liked that cigarette you had last time. In the end, isn't it just that the individual combat capabilities of the agents aren't strong enough, and there aren't enough of them? Why don't you just create some agents to use?" The other two agents gave him a strange look, but Stark became interested and said, "What do you mean? Drone mechs? That's right, don't you still have many mechs in the warehouse? Produce some individual soldier equipment for them like UV flashlights and silver bullets. Can't you equip them with those? Let them fight the vampires." Jarvis's intelligence library doesn't have the intelligence logic to deal with this kind of monster, but I can send out an advanced force of mechs to collect this logic and then start optimizing it. You can think even further. Stop thinking about humanoid mechs and stop dreaming about going up on the field and throwing punches yourself. You don't even have to design and manufacture them yourself. Schiller walked to the vicinity of the experimental platform and said, "You can design an intelligent hive with self-computation capabilities and then arrange multiple such hives throughout New York City according to certain rules. The mother nest can automatically produce mechs of different specifications according to the logic you set, such as light drones for reconnaissance, ground mechanical units, self-propelled spotlights with ultraviolet radiation capabilities, and bioreaction units to interfere with vampire movements, etc. Once the broodstock produces these machines and deploys them on the battlefield, each mechanical creation can record the movement of its opponents, then record its own combat effectiveness and send it back to the broodstock. The broodmother can readjust its production direction based on this information, and all the broodmothers gather information into Jarvis's intelligent library, so you can get the most extensive, accurate, and clear regional combat network. Then you won't have to wear that metal shell to kill those monsters, but can sit in the Stark Tower's laboratory, control everything, and become the true master of machines. Coulson and Hill were stunned and felt a chill run down their spines. Actually, this concept isn't very advanced. It's just the basic principle of information warfare. However, once you replace these elements with Stark's advanced mech creations, the whole scene becomes incredibly sci-fi, even a bit chilling. Imagine several massive hives scattered throughout New York, constantly spawning countless machine creations, each possessing its own intelligence. Once on the battlefield, they can not only inflict effective damage on the enemy, but also transmit all data back to the hives after a defeat. The mother nest has an incredibly advanced calculation system that uses information from the failed offspring in the last battle to remove the weaknesses of the next offspring and enhance their strengths. Specialized combat units can also be formed and coordinated tactically. The steel torrents unleashed from several hells will engulf the entire city and annihilate all enemies. Steel skeletons will penetrate barriers, gears and bearings will devour everything, and Stark can control everything from his laboratory in Stark Tower. Wait, isn't something off about this art style? Coulson shuddered and said, "I think vampires aren't that strong. We can save this tactic for later." Stark's eyes lit up. He paced back and forth, then clenched his fists and said, "Actually, I've been thinking about lightweight warfare. As you all know, the cost of producing a Jaeger is too high, and once it's deployed to the battlefield, it gets damaged and the repair time is too long. I've been thinking about a Jaeger that is low cost, easy to repair, and can be deployed in large numbers on the battlefield. But there is a problem with these mechs. Once the cost is reduced, their processors will not be able to accept overly complex instructions, and their functions will be weakened, becoming less comprehensive. They may not be able to react quickly to different enemies. Moreover, once I change opponents, I will have to carry out a complete upgrade to add new functions, which will cost about the same amount of money and time as advanced mechs, which is not cost-effective. That's right, the idea of the mother nest is excellent. Why should I repair each and every mech myself? Why not just set up an intelligent production line and let them produce and repair themselves? And as you said, if they can really collect data, analyze it, optimize it, and improve it themselves to increase production, that would be much faster than fighting a war and then having me personally make changes, right? Then we can optimize them directly on the battlefield and produce first, second, and third generation adaptive mechs to target the opponent's weaknesses. And it's true that it doesn't have to be limited to a humanoid shape. Humans have 2 feet on the ground, so their center of gravity is inherently unstable. Even if a mecha can fly, it would still need more energy. So why don't I design more legs for the mecha? Yes, that's right. That Spider-Boy is a good example. Spider-Man can stick to walls, so can the mechs I create. I can even give them 8 legs and make them shoot webs, allowing them to easily climb the walls of various tall buildings. As for their defensive capabilities, let me think. I can totally build a transport ship for mechanical soldiers, giving them high mobility, and even the ability to levitate and fly. Once the production line manufactures these transport ships, the mech soldiers can be folded and stored inside. Then they can reach the battlefield at top speed for troop deployment. Stark became more and more excited as he spoke, envisioning several mechs that mimicked animal forms, and coming up with many design ideas for the nest structure and troop transport ships. Finally, Stark even wanted to modify Stark Tower, turning its top into a folded space nest that could quickly rise and deploy in the event of an alien invasion, instantly entering mass production mode. Coulson and Hill stood side by side. He patted his colleague on the shoulder and whispered, his voice trembling slightly, "Call Nick Fury right now. The vampires aren't the main problem anymore. If S.H.I.E.L.D. can't deal with the vampires quickly, then tech genius Stark will rule the Earth." What are you thinking? I recorded Stark's speech and sent it to Nick 20 minutes ago. What did he say? Before the members of Parliament had even finished reading it, they unanimously approved the operational plan for humanity to resist vampires and launch a counterattack. Martial law immediately declared in New York and surrounding cities. All reaction forces are on high alert. We are tasked with resolving this full-scale invasion within 3 days. Do not give Stark any opportunity to maneuver. Chapter 124, The Arbat Incident, Part 3. In a small alley in Queens, Peter hurriedly put on his Spider-Man suit and had a huge internal argument with Venom. If it weren't for that bat monster you created, New York wouldn't be under martial law. My God, is this a world war? You're such a coward. If you ask me, we could take a long detour over New York City. Venom said, "What are we afraid of, you coward? Nobody can hit us anyway." Peter was practically exasperated. He said, "Listen to what they're saying. They're saying the Bat God is coming. Please, I'm a spider. I hate bats." "Really? But I think that's pretty cool," Venom said casually. Peter rolled his eyes at him, annoyed. "Okay, listen," he said. "I've already let you be Batman for a round. Now it's my turn to be Spider-Man, and you can't interfere." Peter climbed to the top of a building and looked into the distance. It was completely dark now, but the whole city was submerged in the red glow of vampire eyes, especially near the Brooklyn Bridge, where countless bats were visibly battling ground troops. Peter slapped his forehead and said, "What on earth is going on?" Even if they misunderstood, there shouldn't be so many vampires suddenly appearing, right? You really think this is all because of us? Obviously, they planned this all along. Didn't you investigate before? There are so many new vampires flocking to New York. Guess what they were originally planning? You mean, they've been planning to invade New York for a long time? This isn't my opinion, Venom said. The trouble that's erupted in Queens has reached a point where things have escalated to a critical point. These monsters were already spotted in Hell's Kitchen weeks ago. Those new vampires in New York are completely unrepentant. They've messed with the wrong people. Hell's Kitchen? Isn't Dr. Schiller in great danger? No, I have to go there now. His psychiatric clinic is poorly protected. I have to go and protect him. It's too late for you now. He was already taken to Stark Tower the moment we arrived. Peter breathed a sigh of relief, then put on the mask and said, "Oh well, they were planning to do bad things anyway. So it's not my fault. I'm going to be Spider-Man now." Peter used a spider web to get to the roof, and as he swung around, he exclaimed, "Oh ho! My good neighbor Spider-Man is here." Within minutes, he arrived near the battlefield where the fighting was most intense. There, a large group of vampires were high-level vampires with magical abilities. They seemed to be under command, and their tactical coordination was quite good, forcing the armed police to retreat step by step. Spider-Man grabbed a web, swung hard, kicked a vampire in the back, then rolled in the air, stepped on the back of a large bat, slammed it to the ground and punched it several times. They took down 2 vampires right off the bat, which naturally attracted the attention of the police. Queens Police Chief George was on the phone saying, "Can we start the counterattack now?" "Okay, got it. I've had enough of these sons of bitches for a long time." He shouted to the police at the front line, "Prepare for heavy firepower suppression. Machine gunners, prepare." A policeman on the front lines shouted, "Look, it's Spider-Man. The Spider-Man who's going to fight all the vampires in the world." George cursed, put away his phone, and walked behind a riot shield. Watching Spider-Man unleash his power, punching a bat in midair with a single blow, he said, "What are you standing there for? Get back to him. Focus on the bats that are landing. This is the perfect opportunity to take care of them." Then he picked up a rifle and fired a shot at the nearest Batwing. The logistics personnel rushed over to restrain him, saying, "Chief George, please return to a safe position. We have just received news that you are in charge of the 3 streets at the intersection of Queens and Brooklyn. You must not get hurt." In the air, Peter rediscovered the tactical mindset that had been swirling in his head. Using the flash of gunfire, he gestured to the police, signaling for their cooperation. Spider-Man spotted a truck that had just exploded on the roadside, wrapped his webs around the vehicle twice, and then swung it around hard. The swarm of bats on the other side were about to organize their formation for another swoop, but they were instead hit by the truck and crushed under the heavy wreckage. High-level vampires can teleport, but only if they aren't stunned by the impact. Spider-Man's attack came too suddenly. Of the 5 vampires, 2 were squeezed between the truck and the wall, and 3 were crushed under the truck, all temporarily losing their ability to move. The police had already received Spider-Man's signal, and the machine gunners loaded a large number of silver bullets and unleashed indiscriminate firepower on the area, killing the 5 bats instantly. Previously, the armed police were already frustrated by the inability to use heavy firepower, but now the snipers didn't care about that anymore and went straight for high-powered armor-piercing rounds. Bats flying in the air couldn't escape the eyes of these well-trained snipers. As long as a bullet grazed them, even if it only hit their wings, they would be either killed or seriously injured. The tide of battle gradually turned, and humanity gained the upper hand, pushing the front line almost to the entrance of the Brooklyn Bridge. However, advancing any further became more difficult. The piers of the Brooklyn Bridge provided natural cover for the bats, and many of them hung upside down under the bridge to avoid heavy fire from humans on the shore. They would then swoop out and launch surprise attacks while the bats were reloading, making the battle a stalemate. Spider-Man didn't have a good solution either, because bridges are different from streets. The distance between the 2 bridge piers was too far, so there was nowhere for him to swing around. He could only engage in close combat. But this stalemate didn't last long. Soon, human-armed helicopters entered the fray and began vying for air superiority with the Bat Army. Sometimes machine gun fire would sweep down, and several bats would fall, only to be finished off by ground troops. Other times, armed helicopters would be damaged by the bats, their rotors smoking as they crashed down. Spider-Man was busy rescuing people at the plane crash site when the intensity of the aerial battle reached its peak. The reason was simple. Hawkeye, Quake, and a group of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents had entered the fray. Although Hawkeye is the weakest Avenger, he is still much stronger than ordinary people and police officers. He basically doesn't need to fire his arrows, and he has replaced them with high-powered silver explosive arrowheads. As long as he hits a bat, it will definitely incapacitate it. Daisy Quake is also very strong. In the comics, her abilities are quite formidable, and she even defeated Magneto when he was controlled by an energy being. However, she has only recently joined S.H.I.E.L.D., and her abilities have not yet been fully unleashed. This is her first time participating in such a large-scale battle. But she is well suited to the current situation. She can use her shockwave frequency to coat the armed helicopter where Hawkeye is located with a shield. As long as any bats dare to get close, they will be blown away immediately, ensuring the safety of the main force's output. Natasha was in another armed helicopter, where she was the overall commander of the air battle. The female agent shouted into the walkie-talkie, "Helicopter squad in the southeast direction. Retreat immediately. Pull up. Those monsters under the bridge are charging up again." She cursed in Russian and then said, "Contact the ground forces immediately and stop those monsters in the southeast. We can't afford to lose another squad. Also, why hasn't Spider-Man been connected to the communication system yet? Send someone to deliver a walkie-talkie to him immediately. I need to know the safety status of the pilot of the crashed helicopter." A moment later, Spider-Man's voice came through the walkie-talkie. "Hello? Can you hear me? This is Spider-Man channel, serial number 10611. I'm currently on the east side of the bridge. The helicopter pilot here has fallen into the water and is stuck in an underwater crevice. The situation is complicated, but my underwater mobility is limited. You need to send someone over quickly." Natasha was somewhat surprised because she knew Spider-Man's true identity. Spider-Man's usual style was to save those he couldn't save, showing a stubbornness that didn't matter if it would delay things. Now, he's actually considering efficiency and asking for help, which is a huge improvement for a boy of this age. Natasha immediately replied, "Don't go into the water. I repeat, don't go into the water. Blindly attempting a rescue without knowing the underwater conditions will backfire. We'll send specialists to rescue you immediately. You head west now. The fighting there is too intense. I need you to rescue the pilots of those 2 helicopters and get them back to the battlefield immediately. Remember, tell them to climb high before entering the area, or they'll definitely be shot down." Spider-Man left without hesitation, and soon the unfortunate pilot who had fallen into the water was rescued. By then, Spider-Man had already rescued the other 2 pilots. He looked up and saw that the armed helicopter squad had suffered heavy losses. Of the 9 armed helicopters that entered the field first, only 3 remained. If it weren't for Quake's protection, the 3 helicopters that Hawkeye and Natasha were in would probably have been shot down long ago. Although humans have advanced technology, the giant bats have the advantage. They are numerous, quick to change their appearance, and once hit, they can immediately use magic to escape. Moreover, they have strong self-healing abilities and can return to the battlefield in no time. Natasha frowned, observing the situation. Hawkeye shouted into the walkie-talkie, "This can't go on. I've seen that bat 3 or 4 times already. It's always him. At this rate, they'll never stop." At this moment, under the pitch-black night sky, swarms of bats hovered over the Brooklyn Bridge, like layers of terrifying curtains, shrouding the bridge and the river. The flashes of machine gun fire and the occasional screams made the scene even more horrifying. A short while later, Jarvis's voice came through the walkie-talkie. 1,200 special night vision devices have been deployed, and the ultraviolet generators are being set up. Natasha said, "Leave 2 for me. Don't drop them yet. Let's give them a big one in the air." Then she shouted to the woman with shockwave, "Daisy, how long are you confident you can control a device that weighs about 120 kilograms? 5 minutes at most." Daisy, dangling from the helicopter in a bodysuit, swatted a bat away with a wave of her hand. During a lull in the fighting, she said, "My ability is destruction, not control, and I have to expend energy protecting this helicopter. If it's a device that requires precise operation, I can only control it for 5 minutes at most. That's enough, Jarvis. Tell Stark that the target for the airdrop is Hawkeye's helicopter. Daisy, get ready. Once the equipment is in place, immediately control it to fly southeast, then stabilize it. It will only take 3 minutes at most. No, 2 minutes. You just need to hold on for 2 minutes, and we'll use the formation to force these bats over." At that moment, Natasha's voice came through Spider-Man's walkie-talkie. She said, "Spider-Man, try to create some commotion under the bridge. Make those bats fly up, and try to drive them southeast, so that they stay in mid-air there for a while. Watch me." Spider-Man hung up the call, leaped high into the air, and landed on the riverbank under the bridge. Countless black tentacles extended from his back, like a spider web, sticking to countless boulders on the riverbank and then slamming them down onto the bridge. Instantly, a large swarm of bats took flight like startled sparrows. "That was a cool move. Let's use an even bigger net, catch them, and throw it over there." Venom stuck one of its tentacles directly onto a bridge pillar, and then the black slime erupted, forming a giant spider web. Peter grabbed the spider web, swung it around a few times, and then threw it forward with a thud. Instantly, more than a dozen bats in midair were caught in the web. Peter hung from the top of the bridge pillar, and with another jerk, a large group of bats was thrown into the range of the ultraviolet generator in the southeast direction. Natasha shouted, "Well done, Spider-Man. I underestimated you." Chapter 125 The Arbat Incident Part 4 In midair, around the flower bud-shaped ultraviolet generator, many bats hovered. Ground troops, machine gunners, and snipers were creating a fire encirclement to prevent these bats from flying out of the generator's effective range. Spider-Man has discovered a new use for venom. After undergoing rigorous training from Iron Man and Batman, the symbiote has adapted very quickly to Spider-Man's outlandish combat methods. Spider-Man first weaves a large web using venom slime, then leaps high from the bridge pillar like a real spider and throws the web out, always catching a dozen or so bats at a time. He then throws these bats into the range of the ultraviolet generator, and soon catches hundreds of bats. Natasha watched as the number of bats around the ultraviolet generator increased, but she still frowned and said, "No, this is not enough. We must eliminate more than a third of their forces at once. Otherwise, the situation will remain very difficult. Humans are already at a disadvantage when fighting superhuman beings, not to mention that their numbers are so great, almost equal to those of humans, and the terrain is not conducive to the use of human weapons. Heavy firepower such as missiles is simply unusable, and the Brooklyn Bridge cannot withstand a violent explosion. Hurry! My wave frequency is gradually weakening. The distance is too far. I can only control it for 2 more minutes at most." Daisy, the shockwave woman, shouted. Without a word, Natasha put away the walkie-talkie, went straight to the cockpit of the attack helicopter, grabbed the pilot, and sat down in her seat, shouting, "Everyone, prepare to eject." Then, while piloting the helicopter, she took out her walkie-talkie and said, "Attention, Squad 2, everyone prepare to disengage. Pilots, follow my movement path. Machine gunners, maintain firepower. We're going to force that large group to the east to move out of here." Hawkeye Clint yelled into the walkie-talkie, "No, that's too dangerous. Stark's UV generator is incredibly powerful. You can't get too close, or you'll end up like those bats." Instantly melted, Natasha fully utilized the Russian fighting style, immediately hanging up the walkie-talkie, ignoring Hawkeye's protests, and slamming the control stick down, sending the attack helicopter hurtling towards the swarm of bats. The regular crew had already parachuted out, leaving only Natasha and the machine gunner. The pilot of plane number 2 gritted his teeth and followed suit. Their machine gunner had already been killed. Crete cursed under his breath, then walked to the machine gunner's position and began preparing to fire. The 2 remaining armed helicopters flew towards a large swarm of bats to the east. Hawkeye operated the machine gun, which provided the main firepower, while Natasha provided tactical cover using the helicopter. Helicopter number 2 also carries the powerful weapon, Quake. Although she needs to devote some of her energy to controlling the ultraviolet generator, she can still use shockwaves to drive swarms of bats toward their destination. The instant the dozens of bats reached the generator's effective range, Natasha yelled into the walkie-talkie, "Daisy, move!" Shockwave gritted her teeth, her hair whipping wildly in the helicopter's rotors. She stretched out a hand, and Hawkeye said, "Wait, let's get out of here. Do you want to be blown up?" "No, someone has to maintain firepower." Number 2, retreat first. I'll follow later." "Natasha, are you crazy? Why are you still driving forward?" Hawkeye poked his head out and saw Natasha's helicopter continuing to fly forward, forcing a bunch of bats that were trying to escape. Daisy said, "Hurry, I can't hold on much longer. Evacuate immediately." Natasha's voice sounded very calm. Hawkeye didn't know where she got such confidence from. He could only grit his teeth, then equipped himself with the grappling hook and parachute, and jumped out of the helicopter with Daisy. The moment they jumped, Daisy clenched her fist tightly. Instantly, the 2 ultraviolet generators suspended in the air exploded violently, shining like a sun over the Brooklyn Bridge. The violent explosion, accompanied by the release of high-intensity ultraviolet radiation, instantly turned all the bats within the generator's effective range into ashes. Beside the giant sun, a small dark figure landed, and then another dark figure swung across on a web and caught her. As Spider-Man placed Natasha on top of a pier of the Brooklyn Bridge, Venom thought to himself, "She has a great figure, doesn't she?" Peter's face turned red instantly, but thankfully he was wearing a mask. Natasha dusted herself off and turned back to look at her spoils. This tactical operation was indeed remarkably effective. A third of the bats that were originally hovering over the Brooklyn Bridge were affected by the blast wave, and the vast majority of them lost their ability to fight. More importantly, vampires are also highly intelligent humanoid beings, and as long as they possess humanity, they will feel fear. Watching their companions vanish into thin air in an instant would put immense psychological pressure on them. It's already visible that many bats have stopped hovering in the air and instead transformed into human form, trying to escape along the alleyways. At this point, one advantage of the Brooklyn Bridge area became apparent. With human forces blocking both ends of the bridge, any bat that wanted to fly out would have to endure machine gun fire and sniper bullets. If it didn't fly out, the only way to avoid being sniped was to transform into human form, which would make it smaller and less likely to be hit. However, if you transform into human form within the bridge area, you can either land on the bridge surface or in the river, neither of which is a good choice. Landing on the bridge would immediately subject them to a hail of bullets, while landing on the river would leave vampires with little mobility in the water, making them practically sitting ducks. Apart from a few high-level vampires who are skilled in using magic, most ordinary vampires could only frantically fly towards the bottom of the bridge. Just as Natasha was about to relay the next battle plan, a loud whooshing sound rang out. She looked up and saw several dark figures rapidly approaching in the distance. Natasha said, "The fighter group has entered. Although armed helicopters can be used for combat, they are not as professional as fighter jets." 12 fighter jets emitted sharp screeches and streaked across the sky, shooting down more than a dozen large bats in almost a single encounter. While low-altitude combat is not a fighter jet's forte, fighter pilots' aerial combat skills far surpass those of these bats that merely fly around aimlessly. The three of them formed a small team and carried out rapid tactical maneuvers, often keeping the bats spinning in circles. The bats in the air were distracted and had no time to swoop down to the ground, which greatly eased the situation on the ground. The ground forces mainly deal with advanced humanoid vampires who use all sorts of magic, such as claws that suddenly appear from the black mist. Even Spider-Man, with his speed, almost took several hits. Ordinary people have a very low chance of survival if they are ambushed. Therefore, the ground forces were losing manpower too quickly, and the personnel who were replaced needed to spend time reorganizing firepower. On the bridge, Steve raised his shield, the sound of his claws scraping against metal sending chills down everyone's spines. Steve said, "This won't do. Spider-Man, are you there? We have to think of something. We can't let them use magic so freely. It's too harmful to ordinary people." Spider-Man's voice came through the headphones. "Destroy the bridge." "What did you say?" Steve asked incredulously. "Spider-Man? Hey, are you okay?" "I said, we have to destroy the bridge so they have no foothold." Peter's voice sounded very calm, even somewhat deep, which was a bit unlike him. But Steve was drawn to it and didn't immediately refute him, instead listening to Peter continue. "I just observed that when they transform into bat form and hover in the air, they cannot use that claw magic. They must transform into human form to use magic. And when they take human form, they need a foothold. The bridge is too wide now so they can use magic without restraint. But once the bridge is destroyed and there is no flat surface left, only uneven ruins, then humans can use the ruins as cover. Not only can they evade magical sneak attacks, but special operations teams have also entered the fray, which is their forte." Steve opened his mouth wide, took a deep breath and said, "Peter, I really didn't expect. Are you really Peter?" It's no wonder Steve was so surprised. In his previous conversations with Peter, he also found that because Peter was relatively young and inexperienced, some of the tactical plans he came up with often seemed rather petty. This is understandable. After all, you can't expect a high school student who has only ever seen street fights to come up with any big plans. But this time it really shocked Steve. Peter came up with a very bold plan as soon as he opened his mouth. Peter's voice sounded very calm. His mind was full of all the possibilities of this tactic. He said, "Now is the only chance. The bats in the air are distracted by the fighter jets and won't interfere with us. And the explosion of the ultraviolet generator just now has destroyed half of the bridge pier in the southeast direction. We only need to destroy the pier in the southwest direction, and the entire bridge will collapse from the south. I estimate that about half of the bridge will completely collapse, which will provide the special operations team with a lot of room to maneuver." Steve stood behind a truck and involuntarily added, "Indeed, The explosion just now caused many bats to flee to the bottom of the bridge. If the bridge collapses, it could crush many of them. He stood on the edge of the bridge and looked down. Below the bridge were all glowing red eyes, which looked very eerie. Steve said, "Don't they like to hide under the bridge? Then lure more bats there. When the bridge collapses, even if they aren't crushed to death, they'll all fly out and get shot." With the battle plan finalized, Steve and Peter began coordinating their operation. They obtained some explosives from Police Chief George, and after a brief discussion with him, Chief George indicated that the ground police forces would be ready to cooperate at any time. With this promise, Spider-Man contacted Natasha again. Natasha also agreed with their rather audacious plan, saying, "Those fussy politicians only think about the cost of repairing the bridge. Why don't they think about the fact that every bullet they fire is made of silver? The firepower cost for this short time is enough to build 2 bridges. Furthermore, your plan is too conservative," the Soviet female agent said firmly. "The larger the explosive yield, the greater the effect. Your manual transport of explosives is far too inefficient." "Listen, I just contacted Stark. The reason he hasn't arrived yet is because he's adjusting his Jaeger. In a little while, about 5 unmanned Jaegers will join the battle, and I'll take 2 of them. All you need to do is load them with enough explosives and then launch a suicide attack. This will not only destroy the bridge, but the violent explosion will also wipe out a wave of bats that can't escape in time." Steve and Peter both swallowed hard. Steve said, "Actually, we originally just wanted half of the bridge to collapse so that—" "Can't you Americans be a little bolder?" the female agent roared. "If the Soviet Union had commanders like you, those Germans would have stormed Moscow long ago. Listen to me. Prepare now. Destroy the Brooklyn Bridge completely,